Hello and a very warm welcome to you. You're watching Eye on Africa live on France 24. I'm Nadia Massi. The headlines for you on the continent tonight. Ousmane Sonko slams French military presence in Senegal. The Prime Minister saying foreign bases are incompatible with the country's sovereignty. Some analysis for you coming up. Also in this programme, Kenya hails a first milestone as the government and opposition of South Sudan sign a commitment to peace, this during talks in Nairobi. And as the Afropop Femoa Festival kicks off in Ivory Coast, we'll be hearing from the star, Femi Aladi. First then, to Senegal. The country's new Prime Minister has suggested that French military bases in the country could be closed. Ousmane Sonko describing such bases as incompatible with Senegal's sovereignty. France has around 350 troops in the country. It retains significant influence in Senegal as the former colonial power there. And that is a relationship Sonko has questioned for years, long before he became Prime Minister. Well, let's start the programme by taking a listen to a little of his speech where he criticised not just France, but the European Union.
We have passed the time when Africans could be manipulated by any people under any regime. You never heard the European Union denounce what was happening in Senegal. And worst of all, it was at the height of this persecution that President Macron welcomed President Macky Sall to congratulate him on having done what he had to do to save his country. It's an incitement to repression.
Well, Sonko there referring to the turbulence during the election campaign before he and President Bassirou Faye came to power in Senegal earlier this year. Let's bring you some analysis then on a little of what he had to say. Guillaume Sotomayor is with us on the programme now. He's a West and Central Africa analyst. He joins us live from Dakar. Good evening to you, sir. Thanks very much for talking to us on Eye on Africa.
Good evening and thank you for having me.
How seriously, first of all, should the French government take these comments that Sonko might want to shut down French bases?
Well, I think very seriously. I think we need to listen to this, to this new leader, and we need to understand where they come from. And need to respect the fact that what they are actually pushing for is actually the will of most of their population, and they reflect something that is a common thread among African leaders and beyond. And one of the most important thread that is actually going on through the continent is an appeal for sovereignty, for for control over destiny from the different community. And that, for many people, is incompatible with the French military presence, or even in a larger sense, as we saw in Niger with the American military bases, or in Ghana with a foreign military presence in a larger sense.
Right, you mentioned Ghana there. There's also been Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger as well, which have been recalibrating their relationship in recent months and years with foreign powers, notably, of course, the French military. Why do you think it's now that we're seeing this apparent rise in anti-French sentiment?
I'd be very cautious to use the expression anti-French sentiment. I think what is going on here is that for the last 30 or 40 years, all across Africa, there's been a general promise by the international community. And you notice that Ousmane Sonko mentioned the European Union, and also from the United Nations and beyond, from the West in general, that by adopting democracy, a certain model of development, by being lenient towards Western values, what is perceived as being Western values, the country and the population would see a considerable enhancement of their quality of life and the condition of living, of social justice, of their governance, and of democracy in general. And these promises have failed in the eyes of many and most of the population across the continent. And what actually people seek throughout the Sahel and beyond in West Africa, and I think more largely on the continent, is new models, is new leaders, is a new time. The movement that we are seeing right now is this. And this is critically important to respect it, to respect this sovereign will, this sovereign desire to actually shift the model, to shift the time, to shift the relationship, and to rebuild new partnership. And it doesn't mean that it's an anti-French sentiment. It is the perception that a certain elite, political, economic, sometimes even religious, has been a part of these failed models. And that right now, there is a desire for something else in general. And that this new model is incarnated by Ousmane Sonko and by this new generation of leaders throughout the continent.
Right, you're talking about new models and new relationships. Is one of those new emerging relationships with Russia?
I think that more generally than Russia, and I think there is an over-focus on Russia, there is a desire to actually have the partnership that they desire in the terms that they desire, for the terms and for the different thematics, energy, military, agriculture, that are perceived as being the true priorities of the local communities of the different countries itself. And so right now, the local elites are being perceived as being antagonistic to the desire and to the actual quality of life of their own people. And these new leaders are being perceived as being one possible solution. The former allies, and so in a broader sense, the international community. You just heard Sonko mention the fact that the French president was, in his eyes, too close to Macky Sall and gave him a direct support and an inclination to continue his repression against Pastef and himself. So the international community has been, in its broad sense, and France and the United States and the European Union, has been perceived as being complacent towards an elite that is being, perceived again as being anti-popular. And so right now, this is a momentum when the international community must be extremely cautious in understanding that this new movement is not something that is going to stop right now. It is something that is very broad and powerful.
Guillaume Sotomayor, really good to talk to you live from Dhaka. Thank you very much indeed for your perspective on the programme.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Let's bring you some other world news then. And the government of South Sudan and rebel opposition groups there have signed what they're calling a commitment declaration for peace, this during high-level talks in Kenya. The deal is being seen as a significant milestone in efforts to end the fighting and rebuild the country's economy. Our regional correspondent Bastien Renouy reports now for us from Nairobi, where that conference has been taking place.
South Sudan's government and several non-signatory groups to the 2018 peace agreement have signed a commitment declaration for peace. Several opposition leaders, such as Paul Malong and Pagan Amun, have committed to renounce violence as a means of solving differences. They are now calling upon South Sudanese citizens to engage in dialogue, and they also commit in building the country and to organize a transition to democracy. It's a step forward for South Sudan. The country has been engulfed in war since 2013, only 2 years after the independence of the world's youngest nation. In 2018, Salva Kiir, the current president, signed a peace agreement with Riek Machar, a former vice president who was the leader of the biggest rebel group of South Sudan. Since then, the two men are officially working together in Juba, the capital, but there are still several rebel groups operating across the country. It is undermining the implementation of the peace process. It is an issue for humanitarian assistance, and it's also an issue for democracy. There's been no election in South Sudan since the independence of the country in 2011, and a presidential election is due in December this year. But it's very difficult to organize an election in a country where several rebel groups are spread across the territory. So will all these groups stick to their commitment? It's still too early to say. But still, it's a positive step forward for South Sudan.
Next, let's take you to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where in recent months, fighting between the M23 rebels and the Congolese army has moved closer to the eastern city of Goma, home to around 2 million people. The city is a key hub for humanitarian workers, but with violence soaring, including violent crime, NGOs say they are struggling now to operate. Our correspondent, Emmett Livingston, reports now from Kinshasa.
On Thursday, near Goma in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, 10 armed men held up a humanitarian jeep returning to the city from the outlying countryside that day, a security source said, before stealing cash and telephones. The gunman pointed to a dead body by the side of the road and suggested the NGO staff would share a similar fate if they refused to hand over their belongings. The incident is but one of many and illustrates a dark trend in the government-controlled zone around Goma amid ongoing combat between the Congolese army and M23 rebels. Crime is soaring and humanitarians are struggling to operate as they once did. Thousands of armed men, including soldiers and pro-state militias known as Wazalendo, have been forced back into a pocket of several dozen kilometres around Goma ever since M23 rebels all but cut off the city in February. The presence of so many gunmen has contributed to a wave of violent crime. Robberies and killings have become common. For example, 29 people were killed in the city in criminal incidents in April, according to the international NGO Safety Organization. The situation is likely worse in the displacement camps around Goma, which are home to about 700,000 people. NGO Médecins Sans Frontières recorded 700 cases of rape per week in the camps in March. Many of the displaced people also say that militiamen regularly rob and threaten them. M23 rebels launched an insurgency in late 2021 and have since captured swathes of territory until they surrounded Goma earlier this year. Rwanda, which shares a border with Goma, backs the M23, according to UN experts and some Western governments, such as the United States. Kigali denies the claim.
Emmett Livingston reporting for us there from Kinshasa. Now, the Ivorian Afro-pop festival FEMUA is taking place this weekend. It's in its 16th year now, and Yemi Aladi is performing tonight. The actress and singer was the first African woman to be nominated for an MTV Europe Music Awards. She's collaborated, of course, with the likes of Beyoncé. Now, ahead of her performance tonight, she spoke to my colleague Fatimata Wayne about what it is she's most looking forward to.
Professionally in 2011 when I won 2010 when I won a talent show, and since then till now, I would tell you the truth, it's the same thing. Wash, repeat, wash, repeat. The only thing that has changed definitely is that now I have more people who understand my brand, understand my identity. But personally for me, I've had a very beautiful revelation of my career, and every day I see something different. I become different. I get better at what I do.
Well, we end the programme this evening where we started, in Senegal. Dahomey, by the Franco-Senegalese director Mati Diop, recently won a Golden Bear Award, that the highest distinction at the Berlin Film Festival. It tells the story of how royal treasures were plundered from the Kingdom of Dahomey by French colonialists before eventually being repatriated to Benin. Now, the film premiered in Dakar last night. That was its first screening in Africa. Our correspondent, Sam Bradpeace, was there.
This premiere was highly anticipated. The return of Benin's royal treasures from France was a point of pride for many in West Africa. There was a sense that this was about justice. Mati Diop's documentary tracks the struggle to return these objects and their reception upon arrival in Benin. Many of the viewers, those in the audience, were greatly impressed by the film.
It's a very important subject. We can only rejoice in seeing this subject embraced by filmmakers from across the globe.
It is an honor to see one of our people working in this sector going to Europe and then coming back to show the work they have made and won global recognition for.
The director herself said this film was a deeply personal project and that she had one key objective in mind.
My film is about awareness rising and about the roller coaster of this violent history. It is about the importance of showing this story at the height of its complexity, at the height of its violence.
When some of Benin's royal treasures were returned from France in 2021, there was hope that this may trigger the return of thousands more objects plundered from Africa and held in European museums. So far, though, there has only been a trickle.
And that report by Sam Bradpeace brings us to the end of Eye on Africa this evening. From me and the team, thanks for watching and good night.